This is GloomNode. Every hull that goes quiet out there ends up as a file on a desk. This desk. I'm the archivist, keeper of the Registry of Hulls and Souls, and your host down here among the closed cases. The registry writes what it can prove and shuts the drawer. I keep the other half. Pull up a chair. Tonight, a brand new laboratory hanging in the clouds of a world nobody ever bothered to listen to. 3 people. A short list of work, a shorter clock, and a man who could not leave a noise alone.
Registry of Hulls and Souls. Case designation Registry 9801. SUFFERANCE. Subject Meridian Atmospheric Station One. Hull designation Isobar. On station in the atmosphere of Tallow. Rated complement 3. Classification loss of hull personnel. Circumstances undetermined. Disposition open. No recovery scheduled. Clearance tier public record.
You heard that? No recovery scheduled. Read that one twice, friend, because that little 4-word phrase is doing more work than anything else I'm going to say tonight, and I'm going to say plenty. Here's what I'll tell you up front, because I don't hide the ball. Never have. A story that hides the ball is a card trick, and you didn't come down here for card tricks. 2 of them die on a Tuesday afternoon, middle of the shift, in a machine that was working perfectly, and I mean perfectly, I mean the telemetry is clean enough to frame, on a correct flight plan, in weather that was inside limits. There is no fault. I've had people go through that file who do nothing else with their lives, mean little men with slide rules where their hearts should be, and every last one of them handed it back and said the same damn thing. Nothing went wrong. And the third one? The third one doesn't die at all. That's my problem. That's been my problem for years. The registry knows exactly where he is. Knows what he's standing on. Knows he was breathing when the last window shut and hasn't got one earthly reason to think he stopped. And there's no box on the form for that. So some clerk typed open, "No recovery scheduled," and closed the drawer and went to lunch, and I hope to God the sandwich was good. One more thing, and then we start. The Isobar was new. First boots ever on her deck. Nobody had ever died on that station. Nothing aboard her to wake up. Whatever came to a clean thing. It came because somebody turned on a light. Tallow's a gas giant. That's the whole entry. 4 lines in the survey book, and 3 of them are coordinates. Nobody ever wrote a 4th grade report on Tallow. Nobody ever will. It's banded like they all are. Big, slow belts of cloud running opposite directions, and where they scrape past each other, the shear rips the cloud into shapes that last about a week and then quit existing. No surface. And that's the part everybody gets wrong, so let's get it right, you and me. Right now. People hear gas giant, and they picture a ball with a floor down there somewhere, under the soup. Like a swimming pool. Like there's a deep end. There's no deep end, friend. There's no end. The air just gets thicker and thicker. And somewhere down past every instrument anybody's ever built, it stops being air and becomes something we don't have a word for, sitting under a weight that would fold a pressure hull the way you'd fold a beer can. And I don't mean crush it, I mean fold it, neat, along a line, like it was made to fold there. Nobody had ever put a light into it. Not once in the whole history of people going places they shouldn't. There's no money in weather. Now, and hear me on this, because I'm only going to be fair to the universe once tonight, I am not telling you the place was full of something. I'm telling you nobody had looked. Those are different sentences. Write the second one down. So what changed? A spreadsheet changed. It's always a spreadsheet. Meridian Development Combine had a paper on somebody's desk saying the top deck of tallow might be worth harvesting. Hang a plant in the right band, draw off the light gases, ship 'em, and the numbers beat hauling the same product 4 systems by boat. And it's a good paper. I've gone through it. Careful, honest. Honest is rarer than you'd think in a document with a profit line, and it ends by saying nobody has ever actually measured the place, and somebody ought to. So the Combine did what a Combine does. Approved a survey. Built 1 laboratory. Ran the whole business through the costing mill, and what dropped out the bottom of the mill was 3 people and 21 days. Now you're waiting for me to tell you Meridian was evil. That's the show you think you walked into. Wrong show. They weren't evil. They were arithmetic. Every single thing that happens to those 3 people, everyone, right down to the last window, is arithmetic somebody did correctly, years earlier, at a desk under a good lamp, before going home to a decent dinner and never thinking about it again. My old man used to say, the devil doesn't need horns, he needs a calculator and a deadline. I used to think that was just a thing he said. The Isobar. First of her class, only 1 ever built, and if that doesn't tell you something, friend, you haven't bought enough used cars. Picture a can, not a ship. She had no drive and no business having one. A pressure hull about the size of a decent house, lowered on a cable off a vessel in orbit, then cut loose to hang there in the band on her own plant, all alone, like a bulb on a porch nobody owns. Now here's the piece you keep. She stayed at depth the way a swimmer stays at depth, by working at it. Constantly. All day, all night, forever. Bleed a little here, push a little there. Trim, they call it. Which means, think about this, the deck of that laboratory always knew where the weight was. Every kilo. Somebody walks from the galley to the instrument bay, and the floor notices and corrects, and it shows up in the log as a neat little wave. The floor took attendance. Every hour of every day, the floor took attendance. Remember that. I'm going to bring it back around minute 45, and when I do, you're going to wish like hell I hadn't. She had 1 viewport. 1. Faced straight down. Of course it did. Dagny Gorse had the station. Atmospheric chemist. 14 years in, 3 postings before this one, and not one of them the kind you'd brag on at a wedding. She was dry the way people who are actually good get dry, didn't explain herself much, and when she did, you didn't need it twice, and you didn't ask twice either. Her crew liked her, and don't you skate past that, because I've gone through a mountain of depositions off crews who hated the boss, and you can hear it in the grammar. The sentences go careful. Everybody's suddenly very precise about who said what. Nobody on the Isobar was careful about Gorse. They just talked about her like you talk about somebody who's good at their job. That's rarer than love, in my drawer. Hell of a lot rarer. She kept a mission clock on the bulkhead in the control space, counting down her 21 days. And she had a tick. Both of the others brought it up separately, unprompted, which is how you know a thing is true. When Gorse decided something, she'd reach up and rap the face of that clock with one knuckle. Once. Like she was settling up with it. Day 1, plant green across the board. She knocked that clock and moved the drops up a day. Good call. Every call that woman ever made was a good call. I'm going to keep saying that, and you're going to get sick of hearing it, and at the end, you'll know why I kept saying it. Colm Achterberg ran the instruments. And Colm Achterberg, friend, is the reason you and I are sitting here tonight. He's the one you'd have liked. I'm telling you flat out, because I've got 90 minutes, and there's no honest way to make you love a man in 90 minutes, except to say so, and then show you the little stuff and let it do the work. Here's little stuff. First day. Before the drops, before anything. He went around that whole station with his hand out, palm flat on a bulkhead, head cocked, then the next bulkhead, then the next. Standing there like a man listening to a used car he's half in love with already. He was hearing the pumps. Never heard these pumps before. Stood outside the instrument bay with his hand on the plate 10 full seconds, and then he said, to nobody, to the ship, to the air. She's fine. She's just new. That was Achterberg. Curious. Mouthy. A man who loved machines and, mark the second half is the loaded half, loved being the guy in the room who could tell you what a machine was doing. Keep the hand on the plate. It's coming back too. Everything in this story comes back. That's the kind of story this is. Now the part of Colm Achterberg that isn't charming. You knew it was coming. There's always a part that isn't charming, and it's always load-bearing. He was 44 years old, and this was a kid's posting. 12 years back, he'd been on the Serrano track. That's the real work. Instrumentation lead on the big survey hulls. That's the career. That's the thing you tell your mother about. And he came off it. There was a review. There were 2 reprimands for showing up to shift, and I'm quoting the Combine's own paperwork here because the Combine has a phrase for everything. In a condition. In a condition? God almighty. The things we write down when we don't want to write the thing down. Then there's 18 months where the man doesn't appear in anybody's records at all. Nothing. A hole shaped like a person. And then he surfaces at the bottom. Rigs. Tenders. The jobs you take when nobody'll hand you the other kind, and you say it's temporary, and it's 11 years later. He'd been dry 6 years by tallow. Really dry. The hard kind. The kind you do again every single morning like push-ups. And no, he never touched a thing on that station. And yes, I checked, because you'd check too. But sobering up doesn't make you a different man. It makes you the same man, awake. And what was awake in there, once the drink came off it, was the thing that wanted the drink in the first place. Colm Achterberg needed to be the man who knew what the noise was. Not wanted. Needed. It was the last brick of the career still standing. Ask me. I'll know. That was his whole footing in any room he ever walked into. That's the check, friend. Day 12 is when the universe cashes it. I'm telling you now so you can dread it properly, the way I do. And Ruth Jarvie ran the Sons. 23. First posting. Not scared of either of them, not even a little, and God love her for it. Came up through instrument school at Calder with the best marks anybody there had handed out in 6 years, and she knew it, and she carried it light, which is the rare part. Plenty of people are smart. Carrying it light is a talent. Her job was the drops. Every day, on the clock, cycle a sonde out the underside lock and give it to Tallow. And on every single release, out loud, unprompted, for no reason anybody ever asked her to explain, and no reason she ever gave. She counted. That's 1. That's 2. Gorse let her. Achterberg egged her on. And inside a week, it stopped being a kid's habit and became the crew's calendar. Somebody'd holler, "What's the count?" and somebody'd holler back 7, and that was the date, the weather, and the whole evening news in one word. That's 7. You hang on to that voice. That little counting voice in the corridor. You're going to hear it again near the end, and it's going to take something out of you. It takes something out of me every time, and I've had years to get ready. Up top, at the end of a cable that wasn't hooked to anything anymore, the almanac. Meridian Deep Survey Hull. Off-lane, a long way from anywhere with a name worth saying, 5 souls total, meaning the 3 on the Isobar and 2 who stayed home. Efren Quist, pilot of record. Halle Turvo, ship's engineer. Now get this part right, because everybody gets it wrong, and the wrongness makes the story cheaper than it is. And this story doesn't need my help being expensive. These 5 were not friends, not family. 5 people on one contract. Maybe 20 meals in the same room, total, lifetime. Names and 1 or 2 facts apiece. Quist knew Jarvie was young. Turvo knew Gorse was solid. Achterberg knew Quist had a kid somewhere he didn't bring up. 20 meals. That's the whole relationship. And I've chewed that over for years, and here's where I landed. It'd be a neater story if they'd loved each other. It's a worse story that they didn't. Because it turns out, and this is the kind of thing you only learn from files like mine, you don't have to love somebody to be completely unable to leave them. You just have to be able to hear them. 2 more facts about the almanac, and then I swear I'll let them work. Fact 1. The shuttle. 1 shuttle. Autonomous. Nobody flew it. It flew itself down, and it flew itself up, and Quist's whole job was to read the numbers and sign the sheet, which he did, cheerful as a mailman, every time. He had a tick too, said copy that when nobody'd asked him anything. Said it the way other men clear their throat. Turvo spent 2 years trying to break him of it, and gave it up as a bad job, and I'm glad she failed. Because you're going to hear a man say, copy that near the end of this, and it's going to mean something no phrase that size should have to carry. Fact 2. The clock. This is the one. This is the gun over the fireplace, friend, and I'm not even going to pretend it isn't. The almanac could sit on station a fixed stretch and not 1 hour more. Way off lane. Carried what she carried. The limit came off her consumables and her transit margin, and it was not adjustable. Not by Quist, not by Turvo, not by prayer, not by anybody aboard, not for any reason there is. 21 days at Tallow. Then Terminus. Then home. That number was on the manifest before any of the 5 of them was even assigned. Arithmetic. Done correctly. Years earlier. By somebody who never met a one of them and never will. Days 2 through 4 were great. Just great. And no, I'm not going to dress that up, and no, I'm not going to rush it either, so settle in. There's a kind of week in a working life. You've had one, I hope to God you've had at least one, where the machine does what it's supposed to, and the people do the thing they're good at, and nothing goes wrong. Not one thing. And it's about as good as this life gets, and nobody ever knows they're in one until it's over. Jarvi dropped her sons. Achterberg's instruments came back true, and he was smug about it, like he'd built every one of them in a shed out back. Gorse wrote her logs. I have them, and they are the shortest, happiest documents in this whole ugly file. Plant nominal. Drop 4 away. Band structure as modeled. Good day. Good day. 2 words. When's the last time you wrote that down anywhere, friend? Be honest. That's 4, said Jarvi, and cycled the lock and went and got her lunch. 4 days. Not long. Long enough for 3 people to become a crew, which is a specific thing, a real thing, and not even slightly the same as 3 people in a can. The food was garbage. Since we're doing the tour, let's do the tour. Meridian ran their remote sites on halvard pattern ration blocks. You've had 'em if you've ever worked a rig. If you haven't, picture a brick the color of wet cardboard, 4 flavors, all of them salt. And on the wrapper, stamped right there, bold as a lie in church, beef type. Type. Nobody has ever met the man who signed off on type. I have looked. He does not exist. He is out there somewhere with the guy who writes serving suggestion under a photograph of food the box does not contain, and the 2 of them are laughing at all of us. The Isobar had a proper galley unit, but a galley unit needs a cook, and that brings us, with a heavy heart, to the Achterberg situation. Colm Achterberg could not cook. Could not. I have 2 independent sworn accounts of that man producing something out of a ration block and a heat plate that Ruth Jarvi described, under oath in a deposition room at Calder, with a registry officer sitting across from her and a recorder running as, quote, structurally wrong. Under oath, friend. He got banned. Day 3. Formal ban. Grease pencil on the condensate panel in the galley with a scoreboard under it. I bring this up because you'll need it later. There's about 11 minutes of anybody having a good time left on this station, and I want you spending them right. Here's what a sonde is, since 40 of them are the reason there was a station out there at all. It's an instrument you throw away. Out the lock, and it falls. And while it falls, it reads pressure, temperature, composition, whatever it got built for, and it talks the whole way down. And it keeps falling, because there's nothing down there to land on, ever, and eventually the weight of tallow closes over it like a fist, and it quits talking, and that's the end of that sonde. One way. Every single one. Nothing comes back up. And that's not a tragedy, and nobody aboard treated it like one, and neither should you, yet. It's just how you measure a place with no bottom. It's cheaper than anything else anybody's proposed, and the Combine costed 40 of them into the mission because 40 answered the question. So, every day, for 9 days, a piece of Meridian hardware falling into a dark that had never once been lit, with its light on, hollering readings the whole way down like a kid falling down a well with a radio. Every day. I'm going to leave that sitting right there on the bar between us. I'm not going to touch it again for a while. Neither did they. That's rather the point. Now, the noises. Here we go. A pressure hull in a gas giant is a loud place to live, and everybody knew it, signing on. The Isobar ticked. She groaned. She made a sound in the small hours, like somebody setting a heavy box down 2 rooms over. You know that sound. Everybody knows that sound. It's the house settling sound. It's the "it's nothing" sound. And another one, off and on, like a rope dragged slow across a beam. And every time, every single time, Achterberg told them what it was. Differential loading on the upper plates, when the band shifted and the temperature went with it. Plate flex at the seams, where two thicknesses meet. That's the plant cycling, that 1 in 3s. That's just the plant. Go back to sleep. And he was right. Hear me. He wasn't guessing and he wasn't soothing anybody. I've had those first 9 days of hull acoustics gone over by people who do nothing else on God's green earth, and Colm Achterberg was correct every single time. And he was having the time of his life being correct. My old man used to say, a noise you can name is furniture. A noise you can't name is a tenant. For 9 days, everything on that hull was furniture. There is nothing in this world, nothing, friend, as comfortable as a man who can tell you what a noise is. That's not a figure of speech. That is the working mechanism of this entire case, and I have just handed it to you across the bar at minute 20, and later on, you're going to remember I did, and you're going to be sore at me about it. That's fine. I'd rather you sore than surprised. Fourth night, they killed the lights in the instrument bay and looked out the viewport. All 3 of them, shoulder to shoulder at the glass. Not much to see. That was the point. Tallow at that depth isn't black. It's this dim moving brown, lit from nowhere you can point at, and the cloud goes by the glass in slow ropes and sheets, and every so often it opens, and you're looking down a shaft into a deeper brown, and then it closes, like something rolling over in its sleep. Nobody said much. Jarvie asked how far you could see, and Achterberg said about 40 meters, and after that, it's just guessing. And I want it noted, that's the most honest sentence anybody speaks in this entire file, and it's about visibility. They had a drink each. 1. Out of the bottle, Turvo stuck in the shuttle as a gag. And yes, Achterberg had his mouthful with the rest of them. And no, it does not matter, and I'm telling you now, so you're not spending the next hour waiting for a relapse that never comes. The bottle was never the flaw. The bottle was the symptom, and the man had the symptom beat 6 years running. The flaw is still coming. The flaw walks in on day 12 carrying a wrench. I keep pointing at day 12, don't I? I know I do. And the 3 of them stood at that glass and watched a world nobody had ever looked at do the thing it had been doing for 4 billion years without an audience. It was beautiful. I want that on the record, sworn and stamped. Before any of it, one genuinely beautiful evening, and all 3 of them got to have it, and nothing down there minded. Yet. It was over that same drink Jarvie asked the question, and she asked it the way you ask a thing you already know the answer to, for the pleasure of hearing somebody smart argue it. Could anything live down there? And Gorse answered her properly, because Gorse did everything properly. No, not down there. You need energy, you need chemistry, and you need somewhere for the 2 of them to meet, and tallow hands you a column of shear and cold and pressure with no surface for anything to get started on. Life needs an edge. A shore, a floor, a vent. Something to stand on. That place is all middle. All middle. Remember that phrase. It's a good phrase. It's a correct phrase. It just turns out correct and safe aren't the same neighborhood. Achterberg said something rude about life having a habit of not reading the paperwork. Gorse told him that was a bumper sticker, not an argument. Jarvie laughed. And that was that. And here's what stops my clock, friend. Nobody ever went back to that conversation. Not once. Not in a recording, not in a log, not in either deposition. I've looked. I've looked the way you look for your keys when you're already late. 23 days after that drink, a woman stands at that exact piece of glass and watches something go past it. And not one of the three of them ever says, well, we did talk about this. Day 7, and the small stuff had set up like concrete. Which is what you want. That's what a crew is. It's the small stuff, set. The cooking ban was a running bit with a scoreboard. Jarvie and Gorse had a card game going that neither one could win and neither one would drop. And don't ask me the game, it's in the file, it's got house rules, it would take me an hour. Somebody drew a face on the condensate panel in the galley. Nobody copped to it. All three knew damn well it was Jarvie. Up top, 4 times a day, the window opened. Quist said copy that to statements. Turvo repeated the plant numbers back twice because that's how she was built, rivet by rivet. The Isobar reported everything fine. And everything was fine. I'm spending real time down here in the nothing, and I know it, and I do it again. Because here's the trade, friend, and it's the oldest trade in my line of work. I need you to want these people out of there. Want it in your stomach. And the only way I've ever found to do that, the only way anybody's ever found, is to show you a week where nothing happens to them at all. That's the week. You just had it. It's the last one. Here's the floor again. Told you it'd be back. Minute 45, I said. I'm early. It gets worse than this later, so consider it a mercy. They were eating, all three, in the galley, and the deck tilted. Not much. Half a degree, held a beat, came back level. A cup slid maybe a finger's width and stopped. Gorse didn't even look up off her plate. Trim, she said. Jarvie got up. And that's all it was. Jarvie had gotten up 30 seconds before to grab something out of the locker, and 80 kilos of Ruth Jarvie crossing 4 meters of a hull that was holding itself up in a gas giant by feel. The Isobar noticed and corrected, and the deck leaned and came home. They thought it was hysterical. And it is. That's the hell of it. Best party trick on the station. For 9 days, that laboratory took attendance on every living thing inside it, faithful as a nun, accurate to 1/10 of a degree, and 3 educated adults used it to bust each other about trips to the head. The floor knew where everybody was. All the time. Every hour. You just file that. Don't do anything with it yet. Just file it, the way they didn't. That's 10, said Jarvie, morning of day 8, and cycled the lock. 10 sons down the well. Band structure resolving clean. The volatiles case building, and building the right way, the way that makes careers instead of ending them. Gorse ran the figures twice and came up 2 full days ahead of the combine's costing. 2 days ahead, which meant 21 days might close with margin, which meant a clean job, which meant a line on her record that came out better than completed. And 14 years in, friend, you'd be amazed what a person will quietly do for one line that reads better than completed. She reached up and knocked the clock face. 1 knuckle. Once. Settling up. Her whole log for day 8 is 4 words. Ahead of schedule. Good. Now, stop. Stand right here with me. Don't walk past this one. 3 competent people. 7 good days in the bank. A machine behaving. A job going well. A kid counting out loud in a corridor because counting out loud is a happy thing to do. That's the top of the hill. Day 8. It does not get better than day 8. Not on this station, not in this file, not ever again for any of these people. From here, it's downhill. And the hill, friend, has a basement. Day 9. Late. They're late, the made-up late of a place with no sun, where midnight is just a number somebody voted on. Gorse in the control space. Jarvie reading. Achterberg down the far end of the main passage, doing not much of anything, which is what a man on top of his week has earned. Something came down the outside of the hull. Not a bang. Not the heavy box. Not the rope on the beam. A drag. One long continuous scrape, starting up at the bow and traveling the whole length of that laboratory to the stern. At about the speed of a man walking. And it took, you're ahead of me, I can feel it, say it with me, it took as long as it should have taken a man to walk it. All 3 heard it. All 3 stopped. And I've got the log, so I know that when that sound finished its trip, Colm Achterberg was already standing with his palm flat against the plate. He'd put it there while the thing was still moving. Didn't decide to. The hand just went, the way a hand goes. 18 more days, that hand's going to remember this. And then he told them what it was. And it was the first time in 9 days he was wrong. And I believe, I can't prove it, this is mine, not the registry's, I believe some part of that man knew it while the words were still coming up his throat. Thermal contraction, he said. A seam letting go along its length as the plate cools. And look, that's real. Real hulls really do it. If he'd said it about a noise a quarter second long, you and I are not sitting here and my drawer is 1 file lighter. It lasted 11 seconds. He had a hydrophone log in his hand that said 11 seconds. Contraction doesn't walk, friend. Contraction is a crack. It's instantaneous. It's everywhere at once. And it does not board at one end of a laboratory and get off at the other on a schedule you could set a watch by. He knew that. He knew it the way you know your own name at 3 in the morning. He said it anyway. And here's the why, and it's the whole man in one sentence, so take it slow, because the alternative was standing in that corridor in front of 2 people who counted on him, and saying, I don't know what that is. 6 years dry, 12 years off the track, 1 brick left standing. Gorse let him say it. Wrote hull acoustic event, nominal, thermal. Signed it. Went to bed. I don't blame either of them. Get that straight. I don't. But that's the moment. Day 9. Good mood. Among friends. The first time those 3 took the comfortable answer over the one standing right in front of them with its hand out. They only did it once. Once was plenty. Once is always plenty. Day 10. It came again. Same direction. Bow to stern. Same pace. Achterberg had a stopwatch on it this time. Of course he did, and he got 11 seconds again. Near enough. And it's the near enough that crawled in under his skin and set up housekeeping. Not exactly 11. 11 and change. Different change each time. The way a man's walk is 11 and change, because a man's walk has a mood in it and a metronome doesn't. Jarvie asked if they ought to tell the almanac. Asked it light. She wasn't scared. She was 23, and this was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to her, and God help me, she was right about that. Gorse said yes, obviously, and did. Clean, factual, no adjectives. That woman wouldn't have used an adjective at her own funeral. Duration, bearing, amplitude. Twice now. And up top, Halle Turvo took the numbers down and repeated them back twice, because that's what Turvo did with numbers. And then she sat there looking at them for a while. Because she didn't know what the hell they meant either. Nobody did. Nobody alive was supposed to. So they did the correct professional thing. And I want the credit paid out where it's due, right here at the window, because these three do damn near everything right for the rest of this story, and it buys them exactly nothing, and you should know both halves of that going in. They instrumented it. Achterberg pulled a hydrophone off the sonde stock, bonded it to the inner plate up at the bow, put a second one at the stern, wired both into the recorder. And then they sat back like duck hunters and waited to catch it clean. Now the mood. Get the mood right, because everything downstream hangs off it, and it's the part people always get backwards when they hear this case second-hand. They were not afraid. Not one of the three. They were delighted. There was a phenomenon on the outside of their laboratory, and they were, professionally, legally, by charter, a laboratory. And Colm Achterberg in particular was having the best week of his working life, and he said so, out loud, on the record. It's in the window transcript, his own voice, to Quist, laughing. We came out here to measure the weather, and the weathers started measuring back. He meant it as a joke. Everything in this file starts as a joke, friend. Every damn thing. That's not an accident. That's how the good stuff gets in, through the door marked funny, because nobody guards that door. Day 11. Achterberg found the thing that killed the comfortable answers dead. Found it by accident. Found it walking. The drag was running. He was headed up the main passage toward the bow, and he stopped. No reason. He dropped a stylus. And the sound outside stopped. He stood still. It stayed, stopped. He walked. It walked. He did that 4 times. 4 laps, up and down the length of that laboratory, with Ruth Jarvie standing in the galley doorway watching him do it, and not saying one word. Every time he moved, it moved. Every time he stopped, it stopped. Like a shadow. Like a kid playing that game on the sidewalk. Like, and I'll just say it because you're thinking it, like something on the other side of a wall, listening for footsteps. And here's the line that took the floor out from under all 3 of them. It's simple. Gorse wrote it in the log that night, 1 line, and I'd bet the desk she sat there a long minute before she let herself write it. Weather does not stop. Weather does not stop, friend. Weather does not wait for you. Weather does not start up again when you do. That is not what weather is. Jarvie laughed. Once. Short. Not a comfortable laugh. And 4 months later, in a room at Calder, she told the registry she still didn't know why she'd done it, and that she'd been thinking about it every day since. I could have told her why. It's the same reason people laugh in church. Something was in the room that the room wasn't built for. Day 12. I told you it was coming. I've been pointing at it since minute 15, like a man pointing at weather on the horizon. Well, here's the weather. Lights up, all of them, every panel, bright as a kitchen. the three of them standing in the main passage. Everything I've told you about what a good time they were having, still true, right up to this exact second. Remember that. It was true right up until it wasn't. Achterberg had a wrench in his hand. He looked at Gorse. Gorse did not tell him no. And here it is, friend. Here's the check getting cashed. The one the universe had been holding since day 9. The one with his whole life co-signed on the back. 12 years off the track. 6 years dry, one morning at a time. 44 years old on a kid's posting. And the one thing left that was his, the last brick, was being the man who knew what the noise was. He did not know what the noise was. So he asked it. 3. On the bulkhead, with the wrench. And it came back. 3. Same count. From outside. From the brown. From 40 meters, and after that, it's just guessing. And inside that 3, right between the second and the third, a pause. Not a rhythm. Not an echo, because an echo doesn't think it over. A pause about 1.5 seconds long, sitting in the middle of a count of 3 like a held breath. Exactly the length of the pause a person makes when they're deciding whether to finish. Then the third. Nobody said a word for a long time. And I can tell you exactly how long, because I've got the hydrophone track with the cabin mic laid over it. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. 3 people standing in a lit corridor, and the only sounds in the whole of the Isobar are the plant and somebody breathing through their mouth. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, friend. Count that out sometime, standing up, in your kitchen. It's a year. Gorse moved first. Gorse always moved first. That's what the 14 years were for. She went to the control space and she wrote it down. Verbatim. Count, interval, the pause timed to the 10th of a second. Because that's what you do with an observation. And because writing a thing down is something you can do with your hands when there is nothing else on God's earth your hands can do. Jarvie went and sat in the galley. Didn't read. Held the book. And Achterberg stayed right where he was. In the passage. Hand flat on the plate. Didn't take it off. 15 minutes. That hand stayed on the steel. Whatever was on the other side had answered him personally, the man who asks, and he stood there palm to the plate like a man at a door he has just heard somebody walk up to. On the other side of 4 centimeters of steel, in a place that is all middle. They sent it up the wire on the next window. And I need you to hear what happened up there, the way it actually happened, because it reads like a failure, and it is not one, and cheap tellings of this case always get it wrong. Gorse gave it straight. Count, interval, the pause. No interpretation. No adjectives. You could have notarized it. And Turvo, engineer, a good one, 22 years of being right about metal, did exactly what every engineer who ever lived would have done. She said, resonance. Harmonic coupling. The Isobar's a pressure vessel. Pressure vessels have modes. A mode can ring back at you. 3 impacts can excite a structure into handing you 3. Send me the plate thicknesses, she said. I'll model it. Quist said, copy that. And that is not negligence, friend. So put the stone down. From orbit, that was 3 tired people in a can reporting a noise. Turvo didn't blow it off. She took it seriously enough to go do math about it, which from an engineer is a love letter. It just never crossed one mind up there that the answer might be somebody knocking. Because why would it? Why in God's name would it? You've lived your whole life in a world where knocking means neighbors. So had they. Countermeasure 1. The obvious one. The one your grandmother would have prescribed. Stop answering. Gorse ruled it, and nobody argued, least of all Achterberg, who'd gone quiet in a way the other two hadn't seen on him before and didn't like. No more knocking. Whatever this thing was, they'd put something into it by responding, opened some account, and the way to close the account was to give it nothing. Log everything. Answer nothing. Starve it. And it worked. 2 days, it worked like a charm. The drag came and went on no schedule anybody could find. The knocking came, its own 3, unprompted, out of the brown, and not one soul inside so much as looked at a wrench. And it got no further, no louder, no closer. It stayed exactly, precisely what it had been. The recorder took it all down like a good dog. And on the evening of day 14, Dagny Gorse wrote a log entry I have a harder time reading than nearly anything in this drawer, and this drawer, friend, has things in it. Protocol holding. Cruise steady. We have this. We have this. 3 words. She earned every one of them, and every one of them was wrong, and there is no version of me that has figured out how to hold both of those at once. I've had years. Still can't. Night of day 15, it knocked on the bulkhead next to Ruth Jarvie's head. She was asleep. The berths ran outboard, 3 in a row down the port side, because in a hull that size, that's where berths go, that's just naval architecture. Her ear was maybe 40 centimeters off the plate. A pillow's width. 3. With the pause. Now, was it louder? No. And I want to be surgical about this, because Achterberg was, God bless his terrified, precise little heart. He had a hydrophone at each end of that laboratory, and the amplitude was identical to day 12. Identical. It had not come closer. It had not hit harder. It had moved. That's all. That's everything. It had worked out that the thing which used to answer had stopped answering. And so it went and found, out of the entire outside surface of that hull, every square meter of it, the one spot where a human being would hear it, whether anybody answered or not. The spot next to the youngest one's ear. The rule worked, friend. The rule worked for 2 days. The rule worked exactly as long as it took to be understood. And I'll save you the suspense on the pattern, because you've spotted it, and you deserve the confirmation. Everything these 3 try is going to work, and then it's going to be understood, and then it's going to stop working. Everything except the last one. The last one works fine. You're not going to like why. Countermeasure 2. Move the berths inboard. They stripped all 3 bunks off the port side and hauled the mattresses into the instrument bay. Only compartment on the Isobar with steel on all 4 sides, and not 1 centimeter of outer plate touching it, and made a nest on the deck between the racks. Sensible. Immediate. Effective. Nothing came near them in there. Not that night, not any night after. Whatever walked the outside of that hull, the inside of the instrument bay was somewhere it either couldn't reach or couldn't be bothered to. And Jarvie called it a slumber party. And it landed, and for a few days, friend, I swear this on the desk. It was actually lovely. 3 grown adults in a pile on the floor of a laboratory. The card game running by lamplight. Achterberg formally banned from cooking even at floor level. Motion carried, 2 votes to 1. Somebody's elbow in somebody's back. The plant ticking away like a big dumb heart. They slept better in that room than they ever had in the berths. I've got that from both of the 2 who could still tell me anything. File that one. Put it in your coat pocket where you can reach it. There is not a lot more of it coming. Now I've got to tell you about the naming, because if I skip it, you'll walk out of here thinking these people spent 3 weeks in a state of dignified terror, and that is not how human beings survive anything, and you know it, and I know it. They named it. Not a good name. Not a log name. Somewhere in that stretch of sleeping on the instrument bay floor, the thing on the outside of the hull became, and this comes straight off a window transcript, Ruth Jarvie's own voice, to orbit, tacked on the end of a status report like a weather remark. The neighbor. As in, neighbors up early today. As in, column, don't answer the door, it's the neighbor. As in, day 18, Gorse herself, and you can hear her deciding to allow it, the neighbor kept decent hours last night. Gorse hated the name, by the way. Hated it. Held that naming a thing you don't understand is the first step to believing you do. And she was dead right, and she got outvoted 2 to 1 by people who needed to be able to say a sentence about it at breakfast without their hands going. And Achterberg, because Achterberg took everything 1 station past the last stop, Achterberg did a bit. Day 19, middle of the quiet stretch, the galley, audience of 2. A full routine about the neighbor coming round to complain. About the sons. About the noise, the property values, the lights at all hours. About whether anybody in this establishment had ever heard of a little thing called consideration. Jarvie laughed so hard on that recording the mic clips. Clips twice. I've listened to it maybe 40 times. Funniest thing in my whole drawer. And I can't get to the end of it anymore, friend. And here's why, and then we'll move on. It was true. Every word of that dumb bit was true. It was a joke, a scared man built on the spot to keep 3 people's nerves stitched together on day 19, and it was a completely accurate description of their situation, and not one of them ever knew it. Comedy is just the truth wearing a mask, my old man used to say. He never said what happens when the mask comes off. That's 19, said Jarvie. Morning of day 16. Cycled the lock. Went and got her breakfast. 19. Same voice as that's 4. Back on day 4. Same little satisfaction. Cruise calendar. How they knew what day it was. The drops had not stopped. Of course they hadn't stopped. Why would they stop? The noise was a phenomenon. The sons were the mission. And not one line of the protocol Gorse wrote had a single thing to do with the sons, because there was no reason on God's green earth to connect the two. No reason at all. That's 19, friend. 19 pieces of hardware, dropped 1 a day, every day, into the dark under somebody's floor, each one falling and hollering the whole way down. I'm not going to say one more word about it. I'm just going to set the number on the bar next to your glass, right where you can see it, and get on with what they did next. You keep an eye on it for me. Day 17. Colm Achterberg had the middle watch. Alone. The other 2 asleep in the instrument bay, in the nest. Him in the main passage. And a wrench in his hand. Now hold on. Before you decide about this man, you're going to hear me out, because there's a cheap version of this beat where he's just a fool, and the cheap version is wrong. And I didn't drag you down here for the cheap version. He'd been at this 8 days. He had a phenomenon on the far side of a wall that answered a count. Every instrument he owned had told him nothing, and instruments were his whole life. That's the joke. The instruments had never once let him down, and now they all just shrugged. And there was exactly one experiment left on the table that would settle the only question that mattered: structure ringing, or mind responding, and that experiment took 90 seconds and a hand tool. Any scientist alive would have wanted to run it. Half of them would have. The trouble with his name on it is that he didn't wake anybody up to watch. He knocked twice. 2 came back, with the pause. He waited 9 minutes. 9. By the recorder, think what 9 minutes is, standing alone in a lit corridor at the bottom of the night. Then he knocked 5. Not 3. 5. Uneven, deliberately ugly, a stumbling little rhythm you could not get out of a structure by exciting it if you had a year and a grant. The kind of pattern that only comes back if something on the other end copied it. 5 came back. Same ugly stumble. Same little hitch. With the pause. And calm Achterberg sat down on the deck of that laboratory, back against the plate, and stayed there the rest of his watch, and told nobody. Because he knew what he'd just done. He'd proven it, alone, at night, no witness, no instruction, no permission. The thing outside was not a phenomenon. It was a correspondent. And the letter had his name on it now. He told them in the morning. And he told them right. Not a confession, a report. Times, counts, the pattern he picked, and the reason he picked it. The recorder file queued and ready. He'd written it up before he woke them. Made himself. And I think that tells you exactly what that man was doing with his fear at 6 in the morning. He was filing it. Gorse understood in about 1 second flat what he'd done. And there was one hard minute in that galley between 2 people who genuinely liked each other. And one hard minute between people who like each other, friend, is worth 10 screaming matches between people who don't. She didn't shout. She said one thing. Ruth Jarvie repeated it word for word 4 months later in a deposition room at Calder, and the recorder got it, and I've got the recorder. You did that on your own. And Achterberg said, yes. That's the fight. The whole fight. 4 words and 1. Then Gorse reached up and knocked the clock face. 1 knuckle, once, settling up, and said they were going to finish the survey by the protocol, and nobody was going to be alone with a wrench again as long as she ran this station. Right decision. Every decision that woman made was right. I keep hammering that nail, and I'm going to keep hammering it, because at the end of this, you're going to go hunting for the mistake. Everybody does. I did, for years. And I want you to have been told, early and often, by a man with the whole file. There isn't one. Countermeasure 3. And it's the best work those 3 ever did together, and I'll not hear otherwise. Instrument everything. Respond to nothing. Hydrophones fore and aft, and 2 more amidships. The trim log pulled every hour and plotted by hand. On paper? In pencil? Because Gorse wanted the shape of it under her own eyes, not filtered through a display some combine contractor tuned for pretty. Viewport shuttered. Achterberg cut a blank out of a rack panel and dogged it over the glass. and over the glass it stayed. And iron discipline on the answering. No knocking. No talking to it. No humming near the plate, friend. That was an actual rule, written down, Rule 6. It came, you logged when and where and how loud, and you went back to work like it was somebody else's dog barking. They were scientists. Faced with a thing that responded to attention, they turned themselves into a recording device and gave it nothing to talk to. And it worked. Day 18. Day 19. Day 20. It worked. The sound outside the Isobar fell away to almost nothing, and 3 exhausted people began, carefully, the way you'd pick up something hot, to believe they had won. You already know the pattern. Say it with me if you want. Everything works. Until it's understood. 3 quiet days. And I've listened to every hour of them, friend. The whole hydrophone record, 18 through 20. All of it. More than once. God knows why. There is nothing on it. Plant. Plate flex. The band shifting at the top of their shift and the upper strakes grumbling about it, correctly, for reasons Achterberg could have named talking in his sleep. Nothing walked. Nothing knocked. They got their work back. Jarvi dropped her sons, the count climbing, and you're watching that number on the bar. I know you are. Don't touch it. Achterberg unbolted the blank off the viewport the second evening, and nobody said, boo. Gorse ran her numbers. Volatiles case 3/4 closed, closing clean. And the relief on that station was enormous. And here's the part I need you to sit in like a warm bath. It was earned. Every ounce. They'd been methodical. Patient. Nobody panicked. Nobody froze. Nobody did one stupid thing, and the thing outside went away. That reasoning is sound. I've checked it 40 ways. It's sound. I have to keep telling you, it's sound. Because otherwise, you'll spend the back half of tonight deciding they were fools, and they were the precise opposite of fools. And that, friend, is the only reason this story is worth the whiskey. Day 21. Terminus. The mission clock on the control space bulkhead ran down to 0. Actual 0. All the digits home. And Dagny Gorse stood in front of it with the entire survey in her head and made the call she'd been turning over for 2 days. She asked the almanac for an extension. And here's her reasoning, right off the window transcript, and you're going to weigh it honest, not the way you're itching to. 3 days lost to the noise. Volatiles case 3/4 closed. And going up now meant coming back later on a second crossing the combine would never fund, which meant the case never closes at all, ever, for anybody, and the whole thing was for nothing. The almanac had margin in her tanks. The Isobar was sound. The phenomenon had stopped. Quist ran it against the ship's figures. Turvo repeated the numbers back twice. The margin was real. Real as rent. Gorse reached up and knocked the clock face. Once. Quist said, "Copy that." There is not one person in that conversation who is wrong, friend. Not one. I have gone through it more times than is good for a man who has to sleep at night. So the 21 days ran out, and they stayed. I'm going to mark that, and then I'm going to keep my mouth shut about it, which does not come naturally. Because I have been through this file 40 times hunting the place where somebody was stupid, or lazy, or vain, the place where you get to fold your arms and say there, that's where they earned it. And it is not there. It is not anywhere. Day 22. Ruth Jarvi saw something. She was in the instrument bay, back 3/4 to the viewport, blank off the glass, and something went past it. Edge of the eye. Out where there's nothing to see anyway, out in the 40 meters and then guessing. And by the time her head came around, and heads come around fast, friend. A head is the fastest thing a scared body owns. There was brown cloud going by in ropes and sheets, same as it had gone by for 22 straight days. Gorse asked what she saw, and Jarvi tried. Give her that forever, she tried. She got as far as pale. Said it twice. Pale? It was pale. Then said she couldn't do better, and stopped trying, and never tried again. Not that day, not at Calder, not anywhere in anything I have. So that's what I've got, and that's what you get, because I don't hand out more than the person in the room got. The person in the room got 1/4 of a second and 1 word. You want the rest of it filled in? So did she. So do I. So does everybody who's ever stood too long at a dark window. The file says pale. The file is all there is. And now, Dagny Gorse does the finest thing she does anywhere in this case, and I'll bet you a night's paw you'd have walked right past it. She did not ask Jarvi to describe it again. Wrote unresolved visual event in the log with the time and bearing. Asked the kid if she wanted a cup of something. Moved on. You understand what she just declined to do. A lesser boss asks twice. A lesser boss sits the girl down, walks her back through it, nice and slow, and gets a shape out of her. Because a shape feels like progress, friend, and every soul on that station wanted a shape worse than they wanted their next breath. That's the pull. That's the riptide. And she stood in it, and she did not move. Because Gorse knew what a second telling does to a witness. She'd given depositions. She'd sat both sides of that table. The second telling isn't a memory, it's a draft. And drafts get better. That's the horror of them. So, ask once. Take what comes. Write it down. Leave it alone. That discipline held for the rest of this case, which is why I can tell you, flat, notarized, no hedging, what those 3 people saw out that glass was never once compared, combined, or agreed upon by anybody. 3 glimpses. 3 private hauntings. No committee. Day 24. Gorse got hers. Alone, on watch, past the edge of the glass. Gone, before she turned. Same as the kids. Or not the same. That's the thing, there's no knowing. She wrote it exactly the way she'd written Jarvi's. Time. Bearing. Unresolved visual event. And then she put 1 line underneath, and it's the only line in that whole log where I can hear the woman instead of the officer, and I'd trade a good deal of this drawer to have heard her say it out loud. Have not asked Jay what hers looked like. Will not. Will not. She knew exactly what she was holding. 2 accounts, separate, clean, uncontaminated, and she knew that the second she laid them side by side, she'd have 1 account, belonging to neither of them, twice as certain as it had any right to be, and half as true. So she carried hers around inside her, alone, for 6 days. Never set it down next to anybody else's. Not once. Most scientific act anybody performed on that station, friend. Bought her nothing. Not 1 thing. Not 1 hour. You do the right thing because it's right. That's the whole reason there is. This file is where I learned that, and I'd rather have learned it somewhere cheaper. And on day 25, the floor started lying. I told you the floor was coming back. Minute 45, near enough. Check your watch. I keep my promises down here. It's about all I keep. The trim. The Isobar held her depth by feel, correcting for every kilo that moved inside her, and Gorse had been plotting that log by hand, hourly, for 8 days. There was a mass on the plot that was not on the manifest. Small. Came out about like a person. Though the trim doesn't measure a thing, mind you, it only tells you what it had to do about the thing, which is a distinction Achterberg wrote in the margin of the plot, and which is somehow so much worse, I don't like reading it. And it moved. Aft. Down the length of the laboratory. At a walking pace? Always. The walking pace? Always. This thing never once hurried in 26 days. Stopped. Stayed stopped 11 minutes. Came forward again. And the three of them stood together in the middle of the control space, touching nothing, saying nothing, and watched the deck lean half a degree toward the stern. And hold. And come back level. Nothing seen. Nothing heard. 3 people in a lit room watching the floor take attendance. And the floor counting 4. Day 27. The passage outside the instrument bay. All 3 present. Achterberg nearest. The inner plate came in. Not a breach, and you take that one with both hands, because this whole case turns on it like a door on a hinge. No crack. No hiss. No fog in the air. No alarm anywhere in the hull. Nothing failed. Steel doesn't lie about failing. There are 100 instruments waiting to catch it in the act, and every one of them slept through this. A section of the inner plate, about the size of a door, and don't think that size was an accident, I don't, deformed inward, bowed into the passage like the lid of a bad can, like a drumhead with a thumb in it, like the wall took a breath, and held it. 4 seconds, and the whole hull spoke. One deep note down every frame and stringer in the Isobar, stem to stern, the sound 100 tons of steel makes when something asks it, politely, to be a different shape for a moment. Then it eased back out. Plate intact. Pressure never moved. Achterberg stood there with a gauge in his hand the entire time, and the needle never so much as shivered. And nothing followed it. Nothing followed it. That's the horror, friend. Right there, that's the whole animal. It did that, made its point the way you'd tap a fish tank, and went back to whatever it was doing. Nobody explained it to anybody. There's no scene in that passage where the smart one works out the implication and shares it with the class. 3 adults stood in front of a piece of steel that had bent in and come back, and every one of them arrived at the same address at the same moment, alone, in about a second and a half. It's not a hard address to find. There's only the one road. It could open them. Could have opened them any time. Day 9. The Night It Knocked by Jarvie's Ear. Any of the nights all 3 lay in a pile on the instrument bay floor, congratulating themselves on the protocol. The hull was never protecting them. Say it plain, the way they finally had to, the hull was never protection. The hull was permitted. Every hour of every one of them being alive, since day 9, was a courtesy somebody else was extending. Renewable daily. Terminable at will. There's a word for living like that, friend. It's an old word, out of the property law, and it's on the front of this file, and now you know why. Tenancy at sufferance. You stay past the end of the term, and you remain only by the owner's tolerance, and you have no right, none, to be there at all. And what filled that laboratory wasn't fear. I've heard the tape. Nobody screams. Nobody weeps. What's in those voices is quieter, and lower, and worse. It's what a man feels when he learns the room he's been shouting in has had somebody standing in the doorway the whole time, listening, saying nothing. They were ashamed. And Colm Achterberg stopped touching the walls. That's the beat. That's all of it. I wouldn't dress it if I could. First hour of the first day, that man went around the Isobar with his palm on her plating, listening. Proud of her. The way some men can't pass a dog without a word for it. It's in every recording from the first 3 weeks. Jarvie ragged him about it. Gorse used it. Colm, come put your hand on this, like the man was a piece of test equipment, which he was, and which he loved being, and which was the truest thing about him. After the seam, never again. Not once. Not in 4 days of recordings. Not in a transcript, not in a log, not in anything either of the others could dredge up when the registry asked them straight. He kept to the middle of the passage, hands to himself. A man walking through his own house like it was a museum with ropes up. He'd been listening at that door for 18 days, friend. And on day 27, he finally understood the listening had never been one way, had never, not for 1 hour, been one way, and he took his hand off the door. And there is not a lonelier sentence anywhere in my drawer, and my drawer is where lonely sentences go to die. Countermeasure 4. Go still. Gorse ruled it that same evening, and it was the most humiliating order that woman ever gave in her life, and she gave it without a flicker, because that's what the 14 years were for. Minimum plant. No drops, and the songs stop on day 27, friend. That's the day they stop, and I'm just going to set that date on the bar next to the number you're already minding. No unnecessary movement. Voices down. One person moving at a time, and only with a reason. They became furniture. 3 of the best trained people the Combine had, and the survival strategy was, be furniture. And it worked. Of course it worked. You know the shape of this thing by now. Nothing came near the Isobar after that plate went flat again. No knocking, no dragging, nothing on the trim plot but 3 people being very, very careful. Now sit with the arithmetic of it. 4 countermeasures. Answer nothing. Worked till it was understood. Sleep inboard. Worked. At the price of the whole outer hull. Instrument everything. Worked till it changed channels on them. And the one that finally held, the only one, the one they rode to the end, was behaving. They weren't defended. They were well behaved. They were tolerated, the way a landlord tolerates, and they knew the difference in their teeth, and they had to keep doing it anyway. 4 more days. In silence. In a can. In a place that is all middle. Day 29. And here's the beat nobody wants, so we'll take it quick and clean, like a splinter. Colm Achterberg got up at 3 in the morning and went and stood in the main passage with a wrench in his hand. He did not use it. Front of the record, big letters, he did not use it. He stood there 22 minutes. I know it to the minute because the trim plot has him stationary that long. The floor took attendance. The floor always took attendance. And then he put the wrench back in the rack and went back to bed. But he went and got it, friend. 2 days after a piece of steel bowed in at his face and showed him exactly what was on offer. That man got up off the floor, out of the nest, past his sleeping friends, walked down the passage in the dark, took a hand tool off the rack, and stood in front of that bulkhead for 22 minutes. Because he still wanted to know. And that's not courage, and it isn't stupidity either, and if you call it either one, I'll pour you out. It's the thing I handed you at minute 20, and you've been carrying ever since. 6 years dry doesn't change the shape of a man. It just takes the drink out of his hand and leaves the hand. He put it back. Give him that. Give him that forever. 22 minutes, and he put it back, and no wrench ever came off a rack again. But he had to walk all the way down there in the dark to find out whether he would. That's the disease, friend. Not the wanting. The having to find out. Day 28. I'm a day out of order. Sue me. The nights ran together for them too. Achterberg got his. Past the glass. Edge of vision. Gone. Didn't say anything for about an hour. Then walked into the galley where the other two sat and said it flat, the way you'd mentioned the plant had cycled. I saw one. And Jarvi looked up, nodded once, went back to her food. That's the whole exchange, friend. That is 3 human beings, each carrying a private quarter-second none of them could put words on, agreeing, without ever once agreeing out loud, that they were not going to assemble the 3 of them into one thing. I've sat with a lot of crews in a lot of files who did it the other way. Talked it into a shape, named the shape, and then got hunted around their own hull by the name, because a named thing has a face, and a face can be anywhere. These 3 never did it. 1 glimpse each, and they let every glimpse stay a glimpse, all the way to the end. They were right. It was the correct procedure. Textbook. Saved not one of them. But you came down here for the truth, so here's a piece of it. Sometimes right and saved don't ride in the same car. Sometimes right rides alone. I wanted you to know they were right. And up top, the windows were closing. The sky itself was taking sides now. Tallow's weather had been thickening in the band for a week, and the contact schedule went with it. 4 windows a day at the start, 3 by the middle. By day 28, 1. And short. And getting shorter, like somebody easing a door shut so slow you can't swear it's moving. Quist still said, "Copy that." Turvo still repeated every number back twice. But somewhere in that last week, the reading back stopped being a habit. I've got the transcripts, friend, and you can hear it change. She's not confirming anymore. She's holding on. Saying the figures a second time because a second time keeps the channel warm another 4 seconds, and 4 seconds is 4 seconds when the sky is easing the door shut on people you know. And she'd started running arithmetic nobody asked her for. Plate thicknesses. Frame spacing. Yield numbers for the Isobar's hull steel. Working backward from a dent the size of a door. And whatever she got, she ran it again with kinder assumptions. And got it again. And did not write it in the log. 22 years, spotless record, and Hallie Turvo looked at a number and decided the permanent record could live without it. File that one, friend. She's going to tell us what the number was before this is over, and you'll wish she hadn't, same as the hearing officer did. Day 30. Dagny Gorse called it. Going home. Survey unfinished. Volatiles case closing incomplete, crossing written up partial, and her record would wear it like a scar for the rest of her career. She did not care. Not one flat damn. She stood in front of that mission clock, which had shown 0 for 9 days, and which nobody had reset, because what in God's name would you set it to? And she reached up, and she knocked the face of it with one knuckle. Once. Settling up. Then she called the almanac and told Quist to send the shuttle down. And then somebody actually looked at the plate on the shuttle. Rated for 2. 2 seats. And a mass allowance costed for sample cases, not for a third adult, and the air a third adult burns on the way up. Nobody had ever looked. Why in hell would anybody look? It's a service shuttle for a 3-person laboratory on a 21-day survey. Down at the start, up at the end, and at the end you go in 2 runs, because there is no hurry at the end of a survey. No hurry ever imagined. Hurry wasn't in the paper. It was on the specification, on the manifest. It had been sitting on that manifest since before any one of those 5 people was assigned to anything. A little landmine of arithmetic, armed years earlier at a desk under a good lamp by somebody who did the math right and went home to dinner. I told you at the top, nobody was wicked. It was arithmetic. We have arrived, friend, at the place where that stops being a saying. So they made the obvious plan. And it was a good plan, and I'll fight the man who says otherwise. 2 up. Shuttle turns around. 1 more run, down and back, for the 3rd. And this was not hope talking. This got checked. Hallie Turvo ran the turnaround herself, minute by minute. Descent, dock, cycle, load, ascent, dock, service, away. Ran it against what the almanac had left in her tanks after 9 days of overstay. Repeated the number back twice. It fit. It fit with room, 2 days and change of margin on the far side of the 2nd run. 2 days. That's a fortune. That's a mattress full of money, in margin terms. Quist checked her figures, because checking her figures was his job. Signed the flight. Said copy that. I want this understood the way I understand it, which took me years. That plan was examined by 2 competent people who wanted it to work so bad it hurt. And who would have said so, out loud, on the record, if it didn't? It was sound. Sound as a dollar. Sound the way every damn thing in this file is sound. The shuttle would go twice. A scheduling problem. That's all it ever was. It was a scheduling problem, right up until it was 2 people falling into a gas giant. And friend, the distance between those 2 sentences is 1 afternoon. And for 1 evening, they let themselves believe it. And so will you. That's an order. This is the last warm hour in the case, and I'm pouring it out whole, because they earned it and so have you. They settled the card game, or rather Jarvie conceded on a technicality she did not accept and demanded be noted in the log, and God help me, Gorse noted it. It's in there. Official Meridian record. Protest lodged. They argued the first thing they'd eat aboard the almanac, and then the first thing they'd eat that wasn't aboard the almanac, which is a different and holier list. Gorse announced she was going to sleep a day and a half, and Achterberg told her that wasn't a plan, that was a symptom, and she laughed. Gorse laughed. It's on the tape, first time in 11 days. Somebody moved to appeal the cooking ban. Motion died on the floor, 2-1. Democracy in action. And then Jarvie asked Achterberg what he wanted brought down on the 2nd run. seeing as he'd be sitting there a day and a half, all by his lonesome waiting on it. And the man gave it real thought. The full Achterberg treatment, chin down, like she'd asked him to diagnose a pump. "Coffee," he said. "Coffee that isn't the station coffee." They howled. 2 days alone in a gas giant, whole cosmos of want available to him, and the man requisitions a better cup of coffee. "That's the last of it, friend. That's the bottom of the glass. I'd pour you more if there was more. There's no more." Then they sorted who was staying, and it took 4 minutes, and nobody was noble, and thank God for that, because nobility would have been unbearable. No speeches. Nobody volunteering with their chin up like a recruitment poster. 3 tired people at a table doing a piece of allocation out loud, the way you'd sort who stands the last watch. Jarvi went up on run 1 because she was 23 and green, and she said it herself, before either of them could say it for her. Not brave, just accurate, which is better than brave and rarer. Gorse went because she was station lead, and there was a case to answer for, a report only she could give. And because if run 2 got scrubbed for weather, somebody had to be standing in a room upstairs, arguing with people who outranked her. And Dagny Gorse arguing with people who outranked her was worth 3 shuttles. Which left Achterberg. And Achterberg said yes before either woman finished her sentence. Flat. Immediate. Like agreeing to lock up. And then he said one more thing. Once. Never again. Both women carried it out of there word for word. Separate rooms, 4 months apart. Identical. It's mine anyway. 4 syllables. Friend. The man's whole confession, trial and sentence. He knocked. The account was his. The correspondence was his. It's mine anyway. Last night, and they spent it on the floor of the instrument bay, all 3 in the nest, the way they had for a fortnight. One more time, out of what? Habit? Superstition? Love? Pick one. Pick all 3. The file doesn't care, and neither do I. They did not talk about it. Nothing on the cabin record but ordinary noise. Somebody turning over. Somebody not sleeping and being quiet about it. The plant, ticking away. Big, dumb, faithful heart. And somewhere down in the small hours, Ruth Jarvi started counting. Not sonds. There hadn't been a sond in 4 days. You know that. You've been minding the number for me. Something else. Under her breath. To herself. Same cadence she'd counted every drop of that survey with, out loud, in a corridor, back when counting was a happy thing a happy kid did. And neither of the others asked her what she was counting. And neither of them told her to stop. I've wondered for years what the number was. Days? Hours? The 2 of them and the one of him. I'll never know, friend, and neither will you, and that's the right ending for that particular question. Some counts are private. Morning. Day 31. The window opened, short and thin, 1 a day now, and skinny as a promise, and the shuttle came down out of it and docked itself, sweet as you like, same as the 11 times before. They loaded. 2 people. The sample cases. The recorder cores. Gorse's log. The whole survey. Everything they'd bought with 31 days of their lives, packed in foam. Not much else. There wasn't much else. And there was a second run coming. There was a second run coming. Quist said, copy that, one more time, to nothing in particular. clearing his throat at the universe. And Achterberg sealed the lock from the inside, hand on the wheel, not on the plate, and you notice that with me, friend, the man still would not touch the plate, and went forward to the viewport, because he wanted to watch them clear. Told the almanac so. It's the last thing Colm Achterberg says on any transcript, anywhere, in anything I have. 6 words, and I'd trade half this drawer for them to be different words, and they never will be. I'm going to watch you out. The shuttle let go and rose. Clean. Autonomous. Correct. Exactly as designed. Exactly as the 11 times before. Off the collar. Hold. Turn onto ascent. And up, through the band, lights on. And for a few seconds, it was just a small bright thing climbing out of the brown. Getting smaller. Doing the one job it had, the job it was born for, the job somebody costed at a desk years ago. Gorse was talking the whole way, reading the ascent numbers down to Achterberg because he had nothing to do but listen, and she knew he had nothing to do but listen, and reading a man the numbers is a way of holding his hand from 100 kilometers up. Don't let anybody tell you different. I've got that recording, friend. She's calm. She's a little pleased even. 9 days over Terminus, 140 clicks of weather over her head, and Dagny Gorse sounds like a woman driving home with the groceries. 4 seconds. Give them 4 seconds. I always do, right here. 4 seconds where it's all going to work. And then the course stopped being the course. No impact. I have the telemetry, and I'd stake the desk on it. There is no impact anywhere in it. Nothing seized. Nothing failed. Not one alarm that had a thing to do with damage, because there was no damage. The machine was fine. Do you hear what I'm telling you? The machine was fine the entire way down. It was knocked. That's the word, the only word this language has that fits, and it's Turvo's word, from the deposition, and 3 separate hearing officers tried to talk her off it and got nowhere, because Hallie Turvo did not use imprecise words about machines in her entire 22 years. Knocked. The way you'd move something off a step with the side of your boot on your way past without breaking stride. Not violence. Not even effort. The shuttle went over onto its side and stopped going up and started going down. And it transmitted the whole way. That's the part, friend. That's the part I carry. Autonomous vehicle. Atmosphere it was never built for, and it did the one thing it was built to do, which was talk, and it talked a long time. Longer than you want. Longer than anybody wants. It talked past the depth where a sonde stops talking. Think about what that means, and then stop thinking about it, like I've never once managed to. It talked while 2 people who were still alive said things to each other. Those things are in the record. I have gone through them. I will not read them to you. Some doors I keep shut, and that one stays shut, and you can be sore at me on the way home. Colm Achterberg watched from the viewport until there was nothing left to watch. Then he kept watching. Quist and Turvo heard every second of it. In orbit. In a science vessel. And what's a science vessel, friend? It's a laboratory with an engine bolted on. No second shuttle. No recovery gear. No atmospheric craft. Not one soul aboard qualified to go get anybody, and not one thing aboard to go get them in. The almanac could no more reach that shuttle than you could reach a man drowning on the radio. When it was over, Hallie Turvo took down the last telemetry figures and repeated them back twice. Into an empty channel. 22 years of habit, friend, talking to nobody at all. You want to know what grief sounds like in an engineer. It sounds like procedure. It sounds exactly like procedure, one beat slower. And then the two of them sat with the thing nobody up there ever got past, the thing that's still sitting in the middle of this file like a stone in bread. They could not file a cause. No fault. The vehicle didn't fail. Weather inside limits, and the log says so in black and white and always will. 2 people went down in a serviceable machine on a correct profile in acceptable conditions, and not one instrument aboard the almanac or the shuttle or the Isobar recorded anything at all doing it. You want to know why the registry wrote undetermined? That's why. It's not a cover-up. Cover-ups I can work with. Cover-ups have a shape. You can dig at a cover-up. Undetermined is the truth. And the truth, friend, is useless. Now, Turvo's number. I promised, and down here I keep them. I said she ran arithmetic nobody asked for and wouldn't log it. She gave it up 11 weeks later in a room at Calder when a hearing officer asked her point blank and she'd had 11 weeks to decide whether to lie. She'd been modeling the seam, plate thickness, frame spacing, the yield figures for the Isobar's hull steel, working backward from a dent the size of a door, held 4 seconds, released clean. No permanent deformation anywhere. What she wanted was a number for how much force that took. She got it. And then she got the other number, the one she never went looking for. The one that comes free with the first one, like a fly in the bottle. The force it would take to do the exact same thing and not stop. The 2 numbers were not far apart, friend. That's what she told the hearing in a voice the transcript describes as level. Not far apart at all. And the second one was well inside what the first one proved was available. Which means the thing outside that laboratory went up to the edge of opening it. On purpose. With control. To the millimeter. And stopped. Not because it couldn't. Because a point was being made, and points are made at somebody. She didn't log it. Said there was nothing the 3 of them could have done with it. That it wasn't information, it was just a worse way to feel, and they had 4 days to get through, and she wasn't going to spend their 4 days like that. Hearing officer asks if she'd do the same again. There's 9 seconds of dead air on the recording. 9. Then she says yes. There was a window that evening. 11 minutes. Colm Achterberg sat in the control space with the set switched on in front of him for all 11 of them. And did not key it. The almanac called. Course they called. Quist called 4 times in 11 minutes, and the transcript of that is 4 solid minutes of a decent man talking into a station that was receiving him perfectly. Every word landing in a lit room where a living man sat looking at the switch. Then the band moved and the window shut. And I've turned that one over for years, friend, and here's where I've landed, for what a barkeep's opinion is worth. It wasn't despair. Too early for despair. Despair takes longer to brew than that. I've gone through enough files to know the fermentation time. I think a man who has just watched 2 people go down into the brown had nothing to say to anybody yet. Nothing true. And Colm Achterberg had spent 31 days being the man who only said true things about what he was hearing. And he wasn't going to quit that late in the game just to fill a channel. He let it close. He'd have another window tomorrow. You already know about tomorrow. I've been telling you about tomorrow all night. And then he slept, because a body does, friend. Whatever the day did, the body puts in for its hours. It's the one shop steward you can't fire. 30+ hours awake. 31 days into a 21-day mission. 2 friends into tallow since breakfast, and he'd watched it happen through a piece of glass with his hands at his sides. And at some point in that manufactured night, Colm Achterberg lay down on the floor of the instrument bay, in the nest, in his spot, between 2 empty spots, and went to sleep. The next window opened while he was out. Of course it did. Of course it did. He woke up to a recording. Quist first, then Turvo. And I'll tell you straight, it is not a cold message. It's one of the most painful documents in this entire drawer, and it's painful because of how badly 2 decent people say a thing there are no words for. Eloquence would have been obscene. What they had was worse and better. They had trying. They'd hit terminus and passed it again. 9 days over when the shuttle went. 11 now. And that margin, the 2 days and change, the mattress full of money, the number Turvo repeated back twice, that margin was the same margin holding the almanac in orbit. It was spent. There was no arithmetic left where staying bought anything but a second hull in trouble and 5 dead instead of 2. The decision wasn't theirs. Hadn't been theirs for 2 days. The manifest made it years ago. And it was already executed. They were underway when they recorded it. Made the message after breaking orbit, not before. And I have never decided, not in all these years, whether that was cowardice or mercy, and I've stopped expecting to. They said they were sorry. Both of them. Badly. More than once. Over the top of each other, once, which the transcript renders as, and which I render as 2 people drowning politely. They said they'd report it the second they made the lane. Said they'd get a rescue coordinated. And Ephron Quist, a man who said copy that to the weather, said, "We're not leaving you out here." Into a recorder. Aboard a ship that was, at that moment, at full burn, leaving him out there. And he meant it, friend. He meant it all the way down to the waterline. That's the whole trouble with it. That's the trouble with almost everything in this drawer. Everybody means it. And Colm Achterberg did the arithmetic while the message was still playing. Didn't need paper. Any spacer runs this sum on their fingers, and he was better at sums than most, and this one had been waiting for him his whole life. The almanac's run home to the lane. The gate schedule, which belongs to Halvard, friend, and Halvard's gates open for the timetable and close for the timetable, and have never once in their history heard of anybody. The report filed at the far end. Then taken in. Then, and here's the slow part, here's where the days pile up like snow, believed. Because the thing being reported is that a laboratory stands intact, powered, provisioned, and crewed by one living man who cannot be reached, and nobody's ever filed that before. And paper that's never been filed before moves slow as Lent. Then an authorization. Then a hull, found, tasked, provisioned for an atmospheric recovery that no yard in the reach keeps standing by because it has never once been needed. Then the whole crossing again, the other way. Set against one laboratory, built for 21 days and 1 crew, running 11 over, 1 man to run a plant that was costed for shakedown, not for seasons. He had the answer before the recording finished. I know it the way I know anything, because the recording runs another 90 seconds past that point, and the man does not move. Not a chair creak. 90 seconds of a man sitting absolutely still with a finished sum. He never said it out loud. Not into a channel. Not into the log. Not once, anywhere, in anything I have. And I'm not going to say it either. You can do the sum yourself, friend. You've had all the numbers for a while now. And then it got quiet. I mean quiet, friend. It got quiet and it stayed quiet, and I have every hour of it because the Isobar kept recording the way she kept doing everything, faithfully, on schedule, to nobody. A lighthouse logging fog for an empty sea. Nothing walked the hull. Nothing knocked. The trim plot showed one mass aboard, one only, moving through the laboratory slow, room to room, the way a man moves through a house when the house is all that's left. And he kept the arrangement. That's the thing I come back to at closing time. Plant at minimum. Voice down. And who was there to talk to, you ask? And the answer is he still kept it down. Moved with a reason or not at all. Stayed still. Day upon day. A well-behaved tenant in a can in a gas giant. Because stillness was the term of the lease, and Colm Achterberg was not going to be the one who broke it. Not twice. And it held. Days. A week. More. Nothing came. He'd been left, and he knew it, and he'd done the sum on it, and the world outside the hull had let him go. Let him be. A man alone in a quiet place, unbothered, keeping house. And I'd like to end it there. You have no idea how I'd like to end it there. There's a version of this file that stops right at this line, and it's not a happy ending, but it's an ending a man could put his coat on and carry home in the rain. That is not the file I have, friend. The file I have has one more page.
Registry of Hulls and Souls. Supplemental finding. Subject hull on station. Powered. Structural integrity intact. Personnel 3. 2 unrecovered atmospheric loss remains not recoverable. 1 personnel status undetermined. No disposition available. Cause of loss undetermined. Disposition open. No recovery scheduled. Clearance tier public record.
And then, on a night 8 days after the almanac broke orbit, there was a tick on the hull of the Isobar. 1. Small. Polite, almost. The kind of noise a new pressure vessel makes for perfectly good reasons. The house-settling kind. The it's nothing kind. The kind a good technician could have named for you without looking up from his cards. Then, after a while, another. And then 3. From outside. At the plate. With a pause in the middle, before the third, about 1.5 seconds long. Exactly the length of the pause a person makes when they're deciding whether to finish. He was never going to be alone, friend. Never. That was never one of the endings on the table, and I think by then he knew it. The correspondence was never with the laboratory. Never with the mission, the combine, the schedule, the gates, the seats in the shuttle. Those were our arrangements, ours, the whole silly paper world of us, and it was never party to one of them. It doesn't sign. The correspondence was opened by a man with a wrench in a lit corridor among friends on day 12 because he needed Needed friend, you remember? I told you the difference. To be the man who knew what the noise was. And a correspondence, once opened, is never closed by the party that didn't open it. Some doors only lock from the outside. My old man used to say that about jail. He never said it about a door you knocked on yourself. Come back to the front with me. One last trip. To the first days, when the Isobar was new and everything on her hull was furniture. Because she ticked then too, she groaned. Heavy box set down 2 rooms over. Rope dragged slow across a beam. And every single time, a good technician put his palm flat on the plate and told his friends exactly what it was, and he was right. Differential loading. Plate flex. That's just the plant. Go back to sleep. Right every time. That's the splinter I can't get out, friend. That's the one I'll take home tonight, same as every night. He was right, every time, about every noise, and he wasn't fooling them, and he wasn't fooling himself, and the instruments backed him to the hilt. And every one of those noises was also the sound of something arriving at a place where a light had just come on. Both true. Both at once, all the way down. And there is no line in that record where the first thing becomes the second thing. I've hunted that line for years, passed it by the hour, by the tick, and it is not there, and I've had to make whatever peace a man makes with a line that isn't there. Maybe there never was a line. Maybe furniture and tenant were always the same word out there, and we're the only ones who ever needed them to be two. The Isobar's still on station tonight. Powered. Intact. Holding her depth the way she was built to, correcting, constantly, in tiny faithful increments, for whatever weight is inside her. The floor's still taking attendance, friend. The registry certifies what is known. I keep the rest.